Hello, mến chào tất cả quý vị anh chị em. Hôm nay là cái poll mới vừa ra nhất giữa ông cựu tổng thống Donald Trump cũng như bà đương kim phó tổng thống Kamala Harris. Thì cái poll này nói bằng tiếng Anh như thường lệ và ở dưới mình cái đợi phụ đề Việt ngữ. Thì mời quý anh chị em theo dõi nha.
For Kamala Harris continues to die down. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map based on the newest poll released from all 50 states to see where Harris and Trump stand on the path to the 270 electoral votes needed to secure the presidency. We'll begin on the West Coast with Washington, where Kamala Harris leads by just 5 points, according to the newest poll conducted. A 5% lead for the vice president, very much weaker than Biden's 19-point victory from 2020. This is very concerning for the Democrats, as the state of Washington, typically solid blue, is only going to fall into the lean Democratic category. We also have Oregon with 8 electoral votes. Kamala Harris once again leads by just 5 points in another state that was solid for Joe Biden 4 years ago. He carried Oregon by 16 points. However, Kamala Harris does lead by a solid margin in her home state of California, where she is ahead by 31 points against Donald Trump. The Golden State will remain in the safe blue column. Moving on to Nevada, our first competitive state, a state that Trump has never won before. In fact, no Republican has won the Silver State since 2000.
We're coming up on a major fundraising deadline, and there aren't many more between now and the election. So I am asking you to pitch in right now to help us meet our goal. There is too much at stake, so let's not fall short on our resources. We are working hard to reach voters across the country, but I need you on board to help us win in November. And I'm counting on you to rush a donation. Even $5 will go a very long way. So thank you, and please take care.
Not every window manufacturer out there has the abilities and the engineering to pull this kind of product off. And when you're able to use it in a unique and inspiring way, beauty can be achieved.
But this November, Trump has a chance to change that. He leads by 1% according to the latest Redfield and Wilton poll, and he has led in 4 out of the 5 most recent polls from Nevada, so it does seem as if Trump remains the favorite in a state he has never won before. So the first flip on the map is going to go in favor of the former president, Donald Trump, on track to win Nevada by a tilt margin. We also have Arizona, another highly competitive Sun Belt state. If Harris wins Arizona, she is in very good shape to actually win the election, but currently it does seem like that is unlikely because looking at the polling, Trump leads by 3 points according to the most recent poll. Kamala Harris hasn't led in a poll since early this month, and it was conducted by a left-leaning pollster, that of course being the New York Times. And so the former president continues to maintain a lead in a state he won in 2016 by a 3-point margin, but lost very narrowly in 2020. It's not going to take too much for him to win Arizona back, considering Biden's narrow margin 4 years ago. And so the second flip on our map is also going to go to Trump, and it's going to be in Arizona, which will be classified as lean Republican. In terms of margin, anything over 15 points is solid, anything from 7 to 15 is likely, anything from 2 to 7 is lean, and anything less than 2% will be classified as being tilt. We're now going to move on to Colorado and New Mexico. We don't actually have any polling from Colorado. It's a state that Joe Biden carried by nearly 14 points in 2020. Kamala Harris is certainly going to do worse, and so she's on track to winning the state by a likely Democratic margin. In New Mexico, though, we do have 2 polls. One of them shows Harris up by 6, and that is the most recent Redfield and Wilton poll. And so New Mexico is only going to fall into the lean blue category, despite Biden's nearly 11-point victory here 4 years ago. So New Mexico is going to be lean Democratic, just like Washington and Oregon. And what we're seeing here is that in some of these traditionally solid blue states, Kamala Harris is performing a lot worse than her predecessor. In Texas, though, Trump is showing some signs of weakness according to just the most recent poll. This is conducted by YouGov. Trump leads by just 5 points. That really isn't where he wants to be. He's still guaranteed to win the Lone Star State. There's absolutely no way Harris will come out on top here because in 2020, Democrats put hundreds of millions of dollars into trying to flip Texas. They still lost by nearly 6 points, and Texas was very vulnerable for Republicans in 2020 considering the unfavorable national environment. But today, Republicans are in a much better position nationwide, and Trump is probably going to win Texas by around 10 points. This 5-point poll is certainly going to be an outlier, but on our map, we are going to fill in Texas as a lean red state, as we are just going by the latest poll for this projection. Before we continue, only 12% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. Moving on now to the middle of the country, almost all of these states are going to be safe red. Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, no brainer, they're going to Trump. We also do have a poll from Montana. It shows Trump leading by 18 points, so the state is going to be safe red, along with North and South Dakota, nearly all of Nebraska, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma. In the 2nd District of Nebraska, a district that Joe Biden won in 2020, Kamala Harris leads by 8 points according to the most recent poll, so it's going to be in the likely blue column for now, but in the end, it's probably going to be a lot more competitive than what this poll suggests. We also have our 2 non-contiguous states, Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska is obviously going to be safe for the GOP, while Hawaii will be solid for Kamala Harris. We're now going to move up to the Midwest, which is going to be the most competitive region in the entire country. This is where the election will be won or lost. And so we're going to start off in Minnesota. This is Tim Walz' home state. Walz is, of course, Kamala Harris's running mate and the incumbent governor of the state of Minnesota. And looking at the polling today, Kamala Harris is on track to win by 7 points. Yes, she is the favorite in Minnesota, a state that Donald Trump probably could have won if Joe Biden had stayed in the race. And so Walz, being her running mate, is going to provide Harris with a slight boost, and that is why the state of Minnesota is just barely going to make the cut to be a likely blue state, with Harris leading by a 7-point margin. So Minnesota likely blue on our map. In fact, Kamala Harris is doing better in Minnesota right now than both Washington and Oregon and New Mexico, 3 states that Biden won by double-digit margins, even though he only carried Minnesota by 7.1%. Down in Iowa, we don't actually have any polling between Harris and Trump. The state used to be among the most competitive in the country. I mean, it went to Obama even as recent as 2012, but just 4 years later, Trump wins it by a nearly 10-point margin. He wins it again by a similar margin in 2020, and in 2022, Republican Governor Kim Reynolds gets reelected by an over 20-point margin. Iowa is not going back to the center. It's going to remain firmly in the Republican column on the presidential level. Trump is going to win by around 10 points at the very minimum, so it's going to be likely Republican. Moving up to Wisconsin, this is one of the most polled states in the country because Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are 3 states that Kamala Harris cannot lose. If she loses even one of these, you can go home. The election's over. Trump is going to be elected the 47th president. And so looking at the polling in Wisconsin right now, the most recent poll shows a tie between the 2 candidates. However, a older poll has Harris up by 5 points. That's going to be the tiebreaker. So Wisconsin is going to be tilt Democratic. It is going to be very, very close, especially considering the margins in the last 2 elections. In 2016, Trump won Wisconsin by 0.76%. 4 years later, Biden flips it, winning it by 0.63%. So Wisconsin is going to be among the closest states in the entire country. In Illinois, it's going to be likely for Kamala Harris. We don't have any polling. We don't have any polling from Indiana either, but it's going to be a solid red state in favor.
So what is money and how does it get value? Paper money has value because someone says so. Bitcoin is
of former President Trump. Up in Michigan, we have another very polled state. It's, again, another very important state, and Michigan tends to be the most liberal out of the 3 upper Rust Belt states. If Trump wins Michigan, there's no way that he's not going to win Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. In basically every election since 2000, Michigan has voted to the left of its two neighbors. But looking at the polling today, Donald Trump is actually ahead in Michigan. According to the most recent poll, we have a tie, but that tie will be broken by this older Redfield and Wilton poll, and that shows Trump leading by 1%. And so the Wolverine state is going to be tilt Republican, even though Wisconsin is currently on track to go to Harris. So we have some pretty interesting dynamics here up in the Midwest, but in the very end, Michigan should still vote to the left of Wisconsin because that's how it's been for over 2 decades. In Ohio, we have a poll showing Trump leading by 10%. This is the latest poll conducted, and the only poll conducted since Kamala Harris entered the race on July 21st. And so the Buckeye State is going to be likely red, just like Iowa. We've seen pretty similar trajectories for these two states over the past few years. They both used to be very much in the center, but since Trump came into the political scene in 2016, he's moved them significantly to the right. And finishing off the Rust Belt in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, Donald Trump leads by 2 points according to the most recent poll. Pennsylvania is probably the biggest prize for both candidates because if Trump can win Pennsylvania, these 19 electoral votes are going to be very difficult for Harris to overcome. Even if Trump loses Nevada and Arizona, as long as he wins Pennsylvania, he is still on track to an electoral college victory. So Kamala Harris really cannot afford to lose a state that she's losing in all 3 of the most recent polls conducted. We're really not seeing the greatest numbers for the vice president from the Keystone State. It should be very worrying for a campaign, especially as her momentum continues to die down. Moving up into the Northeast now, we have a poll from New York that shows Harris leading by 17%. This is a lot better than the 2 previous polls, and so there is a chance now that New York will remain in the solid blue category. There's a lot of doubt as to whether that would actually happen again. The last Democrat to win New York by less than a solid margin was Michael Dukakis in 1988, but currently Harris is saved by this most recent poll. New York will be solid blue on our map. We also do have a lot of other solid blue states from up in the Northeast: Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, as well as Maryland and the District of Columbia, while in New Jersey and Delaware, these are 2 states where Harris is almost guaranteed to win, just not by solid 15-point margins. New Hampshire, though, is going to be a competitive state. Kamala Harris leads by 5 points. This is a state that can get competitive, and polling here does typically overestimate Democratic support. Just look at 2016, when New Hampshire was the second closest state in the entire country. Trump only lost it by 0.37%. That could happen again because, honestly, Kamala Harris's quality as a candidate is very similar to that of Clinton's from 8 years ago. So Kamala Harris leads by 5 points in New Hampshire. It's going to be lean blue, but it will definitely be a state to watch. Up in Maine, the most recent poll shows Harris leading by 17 points. This is a very favorable poll for Democrats, and it's definitely oversampling blue voters. The poll conducted previously only had Harris up by 9, and considering that Joe Biden, who is a much better candidate than Harris is today, he won Maine by 9 points in 2020, there's no way Kamala Harris is going to double his margin. But on our map, we are going to place Maine into the solid blue category, while the 1st district is also solid for Democrats, and the 2nd district likely Republican. Finishing off the map now with just the southeastern quadrant, Trump is going to carry Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, all by solid 15-point margins at the very minimum. We now have 4 remaining states that are going to be significantly more competitive, and we're going to begin in Virginia. This is the only one that Kamala Harris is actually favored in. Looking at the polling, she leads by 3 points in the most recent poll, although 2 previous polls both had Trump up. And so Kamala Harris's lead in Virginia is very weak, even though she's been in the campaign for over 3 weeks by the time this poll was conducted. You really would expect her to be in a better position, but she's barely winning in a state that Joe Biden carried by 10 points 4 years ago. If Joe Biden had stayed in the race, he probably would have lost Virginia, and that's why Kamala Harris is so vulnerable. In fact, Donald Trump actually took the lead in the polling average before Joe Biden dropped out. Harris has been able to save Democrats a little bit here, but whether or not she wins is still in question, and so the Commonwealth of Virginia is going to be in the lean Democratic column. Down in North Carolina, we have a state that Republicans haven't lost since 2008, which was the only time the state went blue since 1976. North Carolina fundamentally is a pretty red state. That's why it's gone to Donald Trump in both of the last two elections, despite polling consistently showing that Democrats were on track to flip it. In fact, in 2020, there was not a single point in time in which Trump led in the polling average from the Tar Heel state. But in the end, he won by 1.3 percentage points, and he's going to win it for a third time in a row. Trump leads by 2 points according to the most recent poll. North Carolina will be lean Republican. Next up, in Georgia, we have a state that actually voted for Joe Biden in the last election. This was the closest state in the entire country, despite Trump having won the Peach State by 5 points just 4 years prior. Brian Kemp, its Republican governor, was reelected by a likely margin in 2022, and Georgia fundamentally is still a red state. Joe Biden did do well in 2020, but Kamala Harris is very unlikely to replicate his success. Looking at the polling, Trump has been ahead in all 6 of the most recent polls, or those polls have showed a tie. Not a single poll has had Kamala Harris ahead, and in a state that has overestimated Democrats in the past, it's going to be very difficult for Harris to win if she can't even lead in a single poll. Trump leads by 4 points in the most recent poll, and that's what we're going to go with for this video. The former president is on track to flipping the Peach State back by a lean margin. And finally, in Florida, the Sunshine State's 30 electoral votes used to be among the most competitive. That is no longer the case. Florida is now a red state. Governor Ron DeSantis was reelected by a 20-point margin just 2 years ago. And looking at the polling for 2024, Trump leads by 5 points according to the most recent poll. We have many polls showing him up by as much as 8 points. And in the end, he can probably win by around 7 to 10. But just going off of this most recent poll by Redfield and Wilton, the state of Florida is going to be a lean Republican, with it on track to voting for Donald Trump for a third time in a row. Despite Obama winning Florida in both 2008 and 2012, Trump has consistently been ahead in the Sunshine State against both Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and now Kamala Harris. And so based on the most recent poll conducted from all 50 states, Trump leads and is on track to winning re-election with 302 electoral votes, while Kamala Harris trails with just 230.
Thì cái poll ngày hôm nay mới nhất có nhiều cái poll nó cộng lại thì ông Tổng thống Trump nếu mà bầu cử ngày hôm nay thì ông sẽ được 302 cử tri đoàn, còn bên bà Kamala Harris được 236. Tuy rằng cái đảng Dân Chủ nó đang tổ chức đại hội, nó đang lên đó, nhưng mà ngày nay thì nó cũng không có qua được. Thì ngày hôm nay thì bà Kamala Harris bà sẽ chấp nhận cái lời đề cử của đảng để ra tranh cử 2024 làm tổng thống thì lại ông cựu tổng thống Donald Trump. Thì những ngày kế tiếp thì để coi cái cuộc tranh luận đó như thế nào, tranh luận để hai người lần đầu tiên như thế nào, nó có thể là thay đổi lên xuống nữa. Và cuộc vận động tranh cử hiện nay thì cũng đang rất là sôi nổi. Và Kamala Harris thì bà cũng đi vận động tranh cử, cũng có nhiều người đến, tuy không bằng ông Trump nhưng mà nhiều hơn ông Joe Biden lúc trước. Đó là chấm dứt cái poll ngày hôm nay. Để ngày mai có cái gì thay đổi thì mình sẽ làm cái poll tiếp cho quý vị.